Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I want to hit on a couple of key things sort of right up front. First and foremost is to thank you all for your time. Our time is precious. It's opportunity cost for you all to come here and spend the day with us. And obviously we want to make that as fruitful and as beneficial for you as possible. So my sincere thanks for you taking the time to be with us here today. Michael touched on a lot of the background on analytics and cognitive and the journey that we're on. That's another piece I want to foot stomp very heavily. The pace of change, as I'm sure we all know, is truly incredible. The pace of data growth is incredible. We've talked about big data, the big data tsunami, the seismic shifts, are all the grand words we use as we talk about the massive amounts of data that are coming our way. It's only just begun. We are barely in the foothills, and the Alps are over the horizon there, because the pace of data generation is just going up exponentially. I think the stats are something like we've doubled the amount of data in the last 2 or 3 years than it was produced in the whole history of humankind, and that number is going to double again in another 5 years or so. I was just over in Germany at IBM's Internet of Things Center in Munich, and by way of illustration, they showed us a library, and as IoT data comes off of a single car, it fills that library in about 5 minutes. Well, multiply that by every car that's out there and every other IoT device, and the numbers of IoT devices are just proliferating. So the more and more data is coming our way. But there is an advantage of that. Obviously, as we believe we're now into this cognitive era where that data is the new raw material. And we take that data and we truly can derive insights from it. And the key now, as Michael referenced, is the compute power and the analytic capability, the cognitive capability coming in on top of that truly allows us to do it both at speed and at scale. And that's something that in the past we truly were not able to do. But now we can, and therefore we can advance our insights and gain true business knowledge or mission knowledge, depending on where you're coming from, and use that to do things better, smarter, faster that we've talked about for a very long time, but it was always sort of one of those those unreachable goals. But I think now it truly is one that's reachable. So take that into consideration as we go throughout the course of the day. The other key points that I would want you to think about in the course of the day. We talk analytics, we talk cognitive, and we bounce back and forth between those two terms very frequently. I think it's important to understand that those are complementary technologies and capabilities. One does not replace the other. A cognitive Watson is not going to replace advanced analytics. They each have strengths and differences, and the key is bringing those together and leveraging the power of both. In my simplistic mind, I think of analytics over on the structured side of things, where we have good understanding and formatted data, and we can crunch numbers, at scale. And on the cognitive side, you've got machine learning, and you've got the unstructured data. So 80% of the data in the world is unstructured, and historically the only way you leverage that is somebody sitting down and just brute force going through it. Now you have the ability to bring in that cognitive capability on top of that to actually, again, understand that data at speed and at scale, and then you can bring that together with the advanced analytics to get a great leap forward. By way of illustration, we're actually, and we may be talking about this later today, we've been running a pilot with the Army relative to the Stryker combat vehicle. So there's 3,500 vehicles of those in the inventory. We ran an experiment with 10% of the fleet spread out around the world, so it wasn't all in one place. We're pulling IoT data off the individual vehicles themselves, engine, transmission, suspension, so forth, pulling in unstructured data from all the training manuals, repair manuals, handwritten reports from the field, and folding all that in together to get an individualized picture of each individual vehicle. Think about it as personalized medicine for the individual Stryker vehicle, and then folding in advanced analytics and, more importantly, predictive analytics to start looking at what are the maintenance requirements for each one of those individual vehicles to ensure that you have a higher mission uptime and you don't have breakdowns in the field. So when you have a breakdown in the field, you've got a crew that's at risk. They're stuck in one location, enemies all around them. You've got to send out another team to go get them and bring them back. And all that degrades mission performance and, of course, has associated costs that come with that. So that's an example of where you're taking that IoT or highly structured data, folding it together with the unstructured data, and then again layering in the predictive analytics to get us that great leap forward. So take that into account as we're going throughout the course of the day. The third thing I'd ask you really to touch on, or make sure you're aware of, is we go into streams, and Michael referenced those over the course of the day, looking at the different components of the federal government. Think about bouncing to other streams that might be outside of your specific area of interest, because I think that's where a real power of innovation comes into play, is taking something that somebody else is doing in another area and bringing it into yours. That's one of the great advantages of my job. As the federal guy within IBM, I'm about 5% of the company. So the other 95% of the company is off in industrial and manufacturing and distribution, communications, and so forth, and building out cognitive and analytical capabilities really geared towards each one of those. But when you come down into the federal government space, there are parallels to all of those across the board. I just mentioned the Stryker. Well, it's very similar to what we do with FedEx and UPS and the Postal Service, relative to their fleets that they have to maintain and turn. An air sortie rate for FedEx is kind of the same as an air sortie rate over on the Air Force side of things. Same too on the communication side. So we're heavily involved in the advertising arena and looking at the cognitive metrics and assessing how well the story and the influencing is going on the advertising thing, particularly in the Coke v. Pepsi wars. Well, take that capability and bring that over to a U.S. government counter-messaging versus ISIS. It's the same thing. It's measuring social media. It's taking that into account, looking at metrics, and seeing how is our messaging working versus their messaging, and analyzing the components of their messaging so that you can then develop your counters. So there's myriad of examples as you go back and forth across the federal government. A third one that I know we're touching on later today is the issue of call centers and the citizen interaction. That's something we've been doing for a very long time, even within IBM itself. We're now implementing that with Census in preparation for Census 2020. So Watson's going to be that first interaction as the citizen calls in with questions relative to their census. And the advantage there is you've got a cognitive capability that you've trained up. It didn't forget what you taught it, number one. It doesn't get tired. And oh, by the way, it knows when you call back in. And so when Sam Gordy calls in, and he was kind of the pain in the butt that called last time, and he's very cranky, the system knows that and can direct things in the right direction, so you get those answers that you're looking for, as opposed to where we are sort of at today's state of technology, when you come in and you get a laundry list of menus and you have to start punching buttons, and eventually you get to somebody, and then you have to start telling your story all over again, right? And which can be very frustrating. So I think it's important to take all those pieces into account and think broadly as we're going through this. I wanted to touch a little bit further, just in depth on the cognitive capability, and make sure that we're aware of the differences, because a lot of people will sort of look at cognitive and say, well, it's kind of Google on steroids, it's search on steroids. But it's really not. It's far more than that. And I think the first element that I would emphasize is that when you have because of the machine learning capability, the cognitive capability actually understands what it's reading, and it's understanding the nuances of what it's reading. And a specific example of that, if you run, sort of these network analytics at a simplistic keyword level, you might note a key link between two different people because meetings keep showing up. Well, that just means that people go to meetings. Doesn't mean there's actually any connection with them whatsoever. But because you're simply going off a keyword, It's drawing a connection which may not actually exist. But when you layer in a cognitive capability that's actually understanding and looking at things temporally and from a geospatial perspective, now you start getting into the ability to say, this person was at this location at this point in time, as was this person. Oh, by the way, 3 months earlier, they were at this same location. Now I'm really starting to be able to draw conclusions there. Reasoning is the second component. So as I said, it's understanding nuances of what's being said and actually pulling that in together. And the system over time learns, and I think that's a very, very critical component that people understand, particularly from an expectation perspective. As you embark on a cognitive journey, the way David Kenny, who heads up this area for us at IBM, described it, and I love this description, is that Watson is an intern. When you first take it out of the box, you can ask it intern questions and you will get back intern answers. So you can't expect it to be that absolute expert on day one, but over time it will learn. And that's a key issue, that on the good side of things it learns. On the bad side of things, you need to make sure you're very careful on how you educate it, because you can inject bias into it and you can drive it in a different direction. So you do need to be very careful about that. And then the third piece is the interaction, because the speech to text component and the natural language processing piece come into play. You can literally ask it questions verbally. You can ask it questions simply by writing a simple answer, and it will begin, based on the complexity of the question you ask, it will begin to feed up answers. And over time, it's going to learn more and more of kind of where you're going with your questioning. So it will become more attuned expert to your particular area that you're looking at. But again, the key is that over time, it will become more and more of that expert and finally tuned into your specific area that you're looking to analyze. So I mentioned already the interaction of the analytics and the cognitive piece, but larger picture, as we said, and can we advance the slide, please? There we go. It does have broad applicability across the full federal government, and that's a key element to come into play. We're going to dive down throughout the course of today on kind of these 5 focus areas. You'll hear that sort of theme repeated, but I think they're all key things to make sure we understand as we're sort of thinking about how you move into a cognitive arena. The first is that hybrid data environment. We all have legacy data. We all have legacy systems. What we're talking about here from a cognitive perspective is not a rip everything out and replace it. That's obviously not a realistic assumption. Throughout the course of time, we all are going to have hybrid data environments within which we have to operate. You will have data which is on-prem. You will have your crown jewels that you need to keep very carefully firewalled within highly secure environments. But more and more, we're going to be reaching out and we're going to be interacting cross-agency, cross-governments, and so the ability to operate within that hybrid environment is absolutely critical. It reaches over, by the way, to that open source, open architecture component further along in that slide, because that obviously you can't achieve the one without the other. Michael already mentioned the data science machine learning component. For me, being the political scientist in the room, these are key people that obviously help us bring all this capability together, help us build the APIs that are applied in the cognitive arena. As you head out into the demo area, you can see the examples of that. That's obviously is increasing over time. The data scientists are few and far between right now, but that's an area where we're pushing very heavily, across IBM. At the end of the day, all that data is useless if you don't have the analytics and the visualization. Our real key play is on the data side of it, though, and I think that's an important thing to emphasize. I think for years have tried to build the visualization capability to end all visualization capabilities, and we're kind of heading in the wrong direction there. The key is use whatever you want. IBM went and bought the weather company a year ago. We don't really care about the visualization piece. We care about the underlying data, how you bring that data in, and link it together. And that's the key. There's probably something like 200 weather apps out there that everyone can have on their iPhones. One of them is IBM's. The others aren't, but probably about 97% of those are drawing off the weather company data. And they're just serving it up in a different way. And that's the key. It's sort of like the old Burger King ad. You can have it your way. You can have it any way you want. Lay in whatever visualization capability you want. You just need to make sure, touching on the last piece, that you've got the data governance component, so you're drawing all that and leveraging it appropriately. Open source, and I'd really emphasize open architecture along with that, is a key element that we are pushing. Everything is completely open architecture. We understand you're going to have to interact with, again, legacy capabilities and other elements, both government developed and from the commercial side of things. But I would also emphasize the open source component. It's yet another data feed that comes into play. And a key one, even when you start dealing with the classified arena, you can layer that in, and in some ways that's much faster than what you're getting through traditional intelligence means or on the battlefield. So understanding what's coming in from all those various sources is a key element. And then last I'd emphasize is the data governance piece. And really what I'd hit on there is the integrity of the data. And I don't know if we have a specific section this afternoon on blockchain, but that would be something I would really encourage everyone to delve down into. For those of you who are not familiar, that grew up out of the Bitcoin world and the virtual ledger. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many applications as you look to other areas. And as Michael mentioned, I come from 31 years in the defense and intelligence space, and understanding where a document has been and who touched it, who opened it, who looked at it, when, is critically important in that space, especially from a counterintelligence perspective. And something like blockchain gives you the ability to do that. So key point where someone's developed something for a virtual currency that's stateless has applicability in the intelligence space. And that doesn't even begin to touch over into supply chain integrity, whole other area of interest for us, and of course coming out of the financial arena to begin with, leverage that over into IRS and CMS and GSA and any VA, any government organization that's a bill payer or is issuing checks. You've got components there. Last slide. Last thing I want to touch on and emphasize, if we could flip to the last slide, please. And that is, as I said, this is a journey. You don't go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, but I think the key is to get started. As they say, you need to take the first step to walk a mile. But I would very, very, very much encourage everyone to get on that journey because this is coming. And as Michael said up front, my vision for the federal government is to fundamentally transform the entire federal government into a cognitive enterprise. Whether you do that on IBM's cognitive capability or somebody else's, it's coming. And just as Michael was referencing, the work was done with computers. If you go back to the 50s and the 60s, and that whole revolutionary transformation, not only in the federal government, but across all of industry and all of our lives, this cognitive capability is that next wave. And again, it's not going to not come, if I can do too many double negatives there. But the key is to get started on that journey, to begin to look at where you think you can apply it, where you want to experiment with it, because you do really need to sort of start small and grow. But pick those things which are key challenges for you that you're not solving through other means right now, and get embarked on that journey. Run those pilots, measure the progress, as we said, but get early victories as well, and understanding of where it works and where it doesn't. And as Michael said, we're all here to help. We're all here to talk through that and bring you guys along in that discussion. And we're learning as we do that too. And that's a key component. All of these interactions that we have, we learn more as to how it's being applied, how we can apply it and leverage it in different ways. So with that, I'm going to bring on Dr. Jason Matheny. Jason runs IARPA, and again, is a 31-year defense and intelligence guy. I'm very much looking forward to his talk. He comes out of biotech, founded 2 biotech companies, came out of University of Chicago, has degrees from Duke, has worked Oxford and Princeton, so hopefully we won't all be too embarrassed to be in his shadow, but very much looking forward to hearing what he has to say relative to applying big analytics into the intelligence space. Again, that's a part that's near and dear to my heart. So without further ado, I bring Dr. Matheny to the stage.